Continuing in the Discourse on Method, in the Hackett edition here, and still in part 2, we come to Descartes' description of, well, his preliminary rules for how he's going to go about his new quest for truth, his new strategy for finding as much knowledge as a human can find. And maybe the single most important thing I could say about this passage is this is where he describes his standards for the new method of knowledge. And remember, we're giving here the method. This is the discourse on the method for conducting one's reason well and for seeking truth in the sciences. The method will have geometry for its model. It's not going to be geometry, but it will have geometry for its model. So how does geometry work? Well, it has fundamental axioms, and it builds on them with absolute certainty. That's what Descartes wants to be the foundation for all knowledge. Well, the axioms, maybe a little more precisely, the axiom or axioms he hopes to find will be the foundation, and the lower levels of the new structure of knowledge will be built with absolute certainty. But probability is okay. Mere probability is okay further up in the structure. Anyway, when I was younger, I had studied among the parts of philosophy a little logic, and among those mathematics, a bit of geometrical analysis and algebra, 3 arts or sciences that, it seemed, ought to contribute something to my plan. Math, geometry, logic are going to contribute something to his plan for getting knowledge. But in examining them, I noticed that in the case of logic, its syllogisms and the greater part of its other lessons serve more to explain to someone else the things one knows, etc. He goes over another disadvantage of logic, that logic doesn't give us new knowledge. Maybe it spreads some knowledge around, but it doesn't help us get knowledge in the first place. Then as to the analysis of the ancients, that's the geometrical analysis of the ancients and the algebra of the moderns, apart from the fact that they apply only to very abstract matters and seem to be of no use, no practical use, he means, the former is always so closely tied, maybe I should just say no use, there's not much use at all if there's no practical use, I don't know, let's set that aside. The fact that they apply only to very abstract matters and seem to be of no use, the former is always so closely tied to the consideration of figures that it cannot exercise the understanding without greatly fatiguing the imagination. That's the disadvantage of geometry. And in the case of the latter, in the case of algebra, one is so subjected to certain rules and to certain symbols that out of it there results a confused and obscure art that encumbers the mind rather than a science that cultivates it. So math, geometry, algebra, these things have useful things to offer, but there's something wrong with them. They're not giving us the knowledge we need. Algebra rather encumbers the mind than cultivates it. This is why I thought it necessary to search for some other method embracing the advantages of these three yet free from their defects. He wants something with the logical perfection of deductive logic and of geometry and of algebra, but something that's more useful, more practical, and something that will give us knowledge of topics these things aren't studying, and something that will free the mind for gaining knowledge rather than slow it down with abstract, confusing mathematical symbols. And since the multiplicity of laws often provides excuses for vices, so that a state is much better ruled when it has but very few laws and when these are very strictly observed. Likewise, in place of the large number of precepts of which logic is composed, I believe that the following 4 rules would be sufficient for me, provided I made a firm and constant resolution never not even once to fail to observe them. So now he's going to go over a few rules for his new method, and I think I can go over this somewhat quickly. The first was never to accept anything as true that I did not plainly know to be such. This is, well, we can go over this more later, but this is basically his criterion for doubt, as I understand this passage. He's telling us what he's going to doubt. He's going to rid himself of all his opinions, except any he finds that are absolutely certain, and then use those to build a new structure of knowledge based on a certain foundation. So he's going to doubt everything that is not definitely known for certain. The second, to divide each of the difficulties I would examine into as many parts as possible and as is required in order better to resolve them. The third, to conduct my thoughts in an orderly fashion by commencing with those objects that are simplest and easiest to know in order to ascend little by little as by degrees to the knowledge of the most composite things. We could say that his second and third rules are to divide things up into little pieces so that we can examine the little pieces and then build things up again from the little pieces. But don't assume we're going to build the same things up again. I'll leave that suggested commentary there and move on. This is not my priority in this passage. And the last, everywhere to make enumeration so complete and reviews so general that I was assured of having omitted nothing. So he wants to be very thorough and not miss anything. This is going to be a ruthless, systematic, complete examination of every belief that can be doubted in order to find a new way of gaining knowledge that has an absolutely certain foundation, and that builds on that foundation after the model of geometry and deductive logic. These long chains of utterly simple and easy reasonings that geometers commonly use to arrive at their most difficult demonstrations have given me occasion to imagine that all the things that can fall within human knowledge follow from one another in the same way, and that provided only that one abstain from accepting any of them as true that is not true, and that one always adheres to the order one must follow in deducing the ones from the others, there cannot be any that are so remote that they are not eventually reached, nor so hidden that they are not discovered. All right, I'm not going to paraphrase that long sentence. You can find it and read it for yourself. This is in the Hackett edition. You should find an acceptable public domain translation somewhere on the internet. It's roughly, I don't know, 1, 2, 3, 4, I don't know, 80%, 70% of the way through part 2 of the discourse. Okay, so let me just comment, though, on that long sentence. Descartes would like to see all knowledge deduced geometrically, not meaning that all principles of ethics and politics and economics and everything else, everything science and philosophy study and everything else are going to be geometrical principles. No, not all knowledge is geometry by any means. But it's going to be learned in the way geometry is learned. Geometrical knowledge is not the kind of knowledge we're going for, but it's the model for how we're going to get knowledge. Knowledge should be something we can gain in the way in which geometry gains knowledge. That's the idea. Geometry is the model for the new method of gaining knowledge. And considering that of all those who have hitherto searched for the truth in the sciences, only mathematicians have been able to find any demonstrations, that is to say, certain and evident reasonings, only mathematicians have been able to give us 100% certainty in anything. I do not at all doubt that it was with these same things that they had examined them that I should begin, although I expected from them no other utility but that they would accustom my mind to nourish itself on truths and not to be content with false reasonings. Mathematics is the only place we've been ever able to get any certainty ever. And this is not going to give me anything useful or any of the knowledge I'm after, says Descartes, but it's going to train the mind to accept only certain reasoning, to accept, to nourish itself on truths and not to be content with false reasonings, to accept only really solid evidence. Mathematics, again, is a training exercise in good thinking, and it is a model, like geometry, is a model for how to gain knowledge. But not all knowledge is math, not all knowledge is geometry. Rather, these things are the styles of gaining knowledge that Descartes is going to apply now to philosophy and ethics and everything else. That's his ambition. More on that in subsequent videos. Thanks for watching.